Welcome to the Dude Perspective. In this installment, we will be looking at the book The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. For my legion of Dude Perspective followers, yes, this is a departure from the normal Dude Perspective in which I take a chick book and I do a perspective as a dude. This book is not a chick book, as evidenced by the author beginning the book by providing his interpretation of a story his father told him about an unexploded bomb landing in his parents' backyard in Europe. To Mr. Gladwell's way of thinking, it would be the most extraordinary experience imaginable. Far be it from me to correct the eloquent Malcolm Gladwell, but I think the phrase you were looking for was best day ever.
Excuse me, I think the word you're searching for is Space Ranger.
Ham-fisted hackery aside, I agree with Mr. Gladwell. Bombs are cool. Unexploded bombs, cooler unexploded bombs in your backyard. Best day ever. That being said, let's get on with the Dude Perspective. Today we'll be talking a lot about bombing. My Audible review for this book was entitled Morality in War is Not About Death But Duration, and earned 4 out of 5 stars. Now, I will admit that's a bit of a cop-out. Most of my Audible reviews fall in the 4-star category. Mr. Gladwell deserves a lot of credit in this Audible version because his team goes the extra mile to make the Audible experience different and more fruitful than simply reading the book. As I sit here, I am still not sure exactly why I gave it 4 stars, but them's the breaks. I pray that Mr. Gladwell won't lose too much sleep over my rating. What you will find in this book is a story about men of principle. The people in this book are prisoners of their own eras, as we all are. And in true Gladwellian fashion, you will learn what it is like to be principled, empathetic, and right, only to learn what it feels like to be born out of your time. In this book, you will watch as people of appalling sensibilities and seemingly stunted vision are elevated and revered as you are forgotten. You will learn humility, and you will know what it is like to win the war but lose the battle. So, my fellow dudes, before we go any further, I have a question for you. Are you more Haywood Hansel, or are you more Curtis LeMay? And spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what happens in the book, this is where you want to stop watching. But as I said previously, we will be talking a lot about bombing. So we got that going for us.
So I got that going for me, which is nice.
To understand the Bomber Mafia, you have to understand World War I. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nobody understands World War I. I mean, sure, Franz Ferdinand was a capable Austrian archduke, but he was a lousy power pop band leader. Well, far be it from me to argue with a historically informed opinion, but I must persist in my demand for context, because only context makes the Bomber Mafia make any sense. First, can we all agree on something? World War I sucked. As opposed to all those other wars which were so much better, right? Millions of people and soldiers died in World War I, and the weird argument is that they didn't have to. The irony in this book stems from the hard lessons of World War I and is so thick you can cut it with a knife. For every rule, there is an exception, right? By and large, nobody likes war. Yes, I am sure that there is someone out there that literally likes it, but most people do not. Now, how do you approach it? How do we deal with it? Do we think war is avoidable or inevitable? If we think it is avoidable, how do we reconcile thousands of years of violence with that stance? If we think it is inevitable, how do we act? In a world in which war is inevitable, how do we wage it if wage it we must? Haywood Hansel considered that we should use planes and bombing to wage war on the machines of war. Hansel was a proponent of precision bombing. This idea of precision bombing could save lives while crippling a nation's ability to wage war. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Hansel's alter ego and somewhat of an arch nemesis, Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay considered that the way to make war suck less is to wage it in a way that makes it as short as possible. From my perspective, this distinction is an inch wide and a mile deep. The point is that neither man liked war. Both seemed to consider it a necessary evil at best, and both set about solving the problem of war in 2 totally different ways. In the Bomber Mafia, we see Hansel's plans begin to establish credibility in the European theater of war, only to falter and fail in the Pacific. In the Pacific, a less nuanced approach that was more robust to the vagaries of weather and atmospheric contingencies would ultimately win the day, and when it comes to a lack in subtlety, it was hard to beat Curtis LeMay. It was only after LeMay replaced Hansel and applied the brutality of incendiary napalm-powered bombing that the Pacific Theater of Operations was brought to a conclusion, arguably without the eventual use of nuclear weapons. But I'll leave that for you to decide. So, come on, what's the due perspective on the Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell? Well, dear viewer, I ask you, what is one to do when the times they are born in demand extreme measures? Our 2021 culture seems to be hungry for revisionist history, applying modern sensibilities out of context to a past that we seemingly willfully fail to comprehend. During times of war, the stakes are large and the potential for collateral damage and unintended consequences absolutely enormous. The Bomber Mafia is a dream come true for any of us blinded by our own bubble-induced brilliance and convinced that when confronted with the moment, we would choose wisely. For all our sakes, I pray there is a bit of truth to that. And finally, this book reminds us that if there is a time for precision, there must be a time for brutality. And solutions to problems, if you'll excuse the pun, find their target only when the time, people, situation, and externalities conspire to allow that to happen. So there you go, the due perspective on the Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, share, subscribe, comment. You know what to do. Keep an eye on the channel. This is life, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Bombing is something I know a lot about.